Imagine this: the longship horns blare, a sound that chills your very bones. Smoke chokes the morning air, and the screams of your household echo through the great hall. You are a noblewoman, raised in privilege, a queen or a princess, destined for a powerful alliance. But now, your world is burning. Armed warriors, their faces hardened by battle, crash through the doors. They drag you, jewels still tangled in your hair, from the wreckage of your life. Your kingdom, your family, your future, all shattered in an instant. In this brutal moment, you begin to understand the unspoken fate of noble women. After Viking conquests. But what did that fate truly entail? Was it always immediate death, or something far more insidious, a slow, agonizing erasure of identity and status? To understand this grim reality, we must venture into the heart of Viking Age Europe, a time when kingdoms crumbled and new powers rose from the ashes of old. This era, marked by relentless raids and brutal conquests, rarely recorded the intimate suffering of the vanquished. The histories were written by the victors, by the men who fought and died, or by the monks who recorded the devastation. The voices of women, especially noble women stripped of their standing, were almost entirely silenced. The initial shock of a Viking raid was just the first layer of horror. For men, battle often meant a swift end or a chance at glorious death. For noble women, the outcome was far more complex, a terrifying spectrum of possibilities that all began with capture. One moment, they were mistresses of castles, holding court, managing estates, their lives defined by status and lineage. The next, they were property, their bodies and futures entirely at the mercy of their captors. This immediate shift from power to utter helplessness was a profound psychological blow, the first crack in the foundation of their identity. But the initial terror was only the beginning. For many noble women, their high birth was both a curse and a strange form of protection. Unlike peasant women who might be swiftly enslaved or killed, a noblewoman represented a valuable asset. She was a pawn in a brutal game, a commodity to be traded, ransomed, or married for strategic gain. Her worth was no longer in her person, but in her connections, her family's wealth, or her potential to legitimize new power. The conquerors saw not a human being, but a resource to be exploited. Yet, for noble women, the horror often took a different, more drawn-out form. If her family was still alive and powerful enough, there was the possibility of ransom. But imagine the torment of waiting, not knowing if your father, your brother, your husband, would pay the exorbitant price demanded for your freedom. And even if they did, what then? Would you return to your old life, forever marked by the shame of capture, your reputation perhaps tarnished beyond repair? The psychological scars of such an ordeal would never truly heal. This uncertainty, this constant limbo, was a torture unique to their high status. And this wasn't a rare occurrence. It was a devastating pattern, repeated across the shattered kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England, Frankish Gaul, and Gaelic Ireland. Chroniclers of the time, often monks in ravaged monasteries, spoke of women being carried off or taken into captivity. These terse phrases hide a world of trauma. They gloss over the forced marches, the long journeys across treacherous seas in cramped longships, the terror of not knowing where they were going or what awaited them. These journeys alone would break lesser spirits, but for noble women, the full weight of their loss was just beginning to settle in. Little did they know, their trials had only just begun. The conquerors had no intention of simply letting them go. For many noble women, their fate was to become part of the new order, a brutal integration into Viking society. This often meant forced marriage or concubinage. A Viking chieftain, having overthrown a local lord, might take his daughter or widow as a wife. This wasn't about love or even respect, but about absorbing the conquered lineage, seizing land, and consolidating power through the very women who once represented the old regime. What came next was a profound redefinition of their very being. Stripped of their titles and their familiar surroundings, they were forced to adapt to a new culture, a new language, and a new way of life that was often starkly different from their own. Their Christian faith might be challenged by pagan rituals. Their refined manners and expectations would clash with the rougher customs of their new lords. They were expected to manage new households, often in foreign lands, bearing children who would be half Viking, half something else, caught between two worlds. This wasn't just physical captivity, it was cultural and spiritual subjugation. The truth, however, was far more brutal. Even if a noblewoman was married to a chieftain, her status was never truly equal to a freeborn Viking woman. She was a war prize, a symbol of conquest. Her children might inherit a new legacy, but she herself remained a living trophy, a constant reminder of her people's defeat. Her every action, her every word, would be scrutinized. She lived under the shadow of suspicion, forever an outsider, forever the other. This deeply personal experience of colonization stripped them of their agency, their voice, and their very sense of self. But the fate of noble women was not always marriage. Sometimes, they were simply taken as thralls, as slaves. This was the ultimate degradation, a complete erasure of their former identity. A queen, a princess, a lady of high birth, could find herself performing menial labor. Her hands, once accustomed to fine embroidery or quill, now calloused by harsh work. Her rich garments replaced by coarse wool, her noble name forgotten, replaced by a simple slave designation. Her body, once revered and protected, now subject to the whims of her owners. This was a fate that would have been unimaginable in their former lives, a nightmare made real. These seeds of despair would soon blossom into a stark, unyielding reality. The trade in thralls was a significant part of the Viking economy. Women, especially those deemed beautiful or strong, were valuable commodities. A noblewoman might be paraded in a slave market, her aristocratic features, once a source of pride, now simply a mark of her worth to a potential buyer. She might be sold far from her homeland, across vast seas to distant lands, never to see her family, her culture, or her home again. This was the true horror of the unspoken fate of noble women after Viking conquests. Consider the journey of such a woman. From the burning hall, she would be dragged onto a longship. The stench of salt and unwashed men, the constant rocking of the waves, the fear of the unknown. She would arrive in a new settlement, perhaps in Denmark, Norway, or even further east, to Russlands. Here, her fate would be decided. Would she be a concubine for a powerful jarl, her children potentially rising in status, but her own position always precarious? Or would she be sold, passed from hand to hand, her body and labor exploited until she was deemed worthless? The psychological impact of this complete loss was devastating. Imagine having your entire world torn away, not just your physical possessions, but your name, your family, your religion, your language. The very essence of who you are, systematically dismantled. Many would have succumbed to despair, to the harsh conditions, or to the violence that was an inherent part of the thrall system. Their stories are lost to us, swallowed by the silence of history. We can only imagine the tears, the quiet defiance, the desperate longing for a life that was no more. What happened next would silence even his staunchest allies. For those who endured, life was a constant struggle for survival. They had to learn new customs, new languages, new ways to navigate a brutal world. Some, through sheer force of will or a stroke of luck, might find a measure of stability. A concubine might gain influence through her children, or a thrall might be freed through an act of kindness or a demonstration of skill. But these were exceptions, fragile rays of hope in a vast sea of hardship. The constant threat of being resold, of further degradation, always loomed. But the true test of their resilience and the ultimate horror was still to come. Imagine a woman, once the daughter of a king, now an aging thrall, her body worn, her beauty faded, her memory of her former life a distant, painful whisper. She might watch her own children grow up speaking a foreign tongue, worshipping foreign gods, knowing nothing of their mother's noble lineage. This was the ultimate erasure, a complete victory for the conquerors. Her bloodline continued, but her identity, her legacy, was systematically dissolved into the fabric of the new world. Take, for instance, the accounts, however brief, of Irish noblewomen, taken during the Viking raids on Ireland. They were often described as being carried overseas. Their destination, Iceland, Norway, or the burgeoning Viking settlements in Britain. Once in these new lands, their value as wives was recognized, particularly for their skills in weaving, their knowledge of agricultural practices, and their Christian faith, which some Viking settlers found intriguing. Yet this value did not equate to freedom or respect in the way they once knew it. They were still, in essence, property. He didn't know it yet, but that decision had sealed his fate. These women, often skilled in literacy and administration from their former lives, might have been put to work managing households, but under strict supervision. Their ability to read and write, once a mark of their elite status, might now be used to manage their captors' burgeoning estates, turning their knowledge against their own heritage. Their talents were no longer their own. They were tools for their new masters. Their education, a privilege of their birth, became another chain binding them. The climax of this unspoken fate is not a single dramatic event, but a slow, agonizing process of psychological and cultural annihilation. Picture her, a woman named Ethelfled, perhaps, from a noble Anglo-Saxon family. Her father, a Mjolderman, died defending their lands. She was captured, along with her younger sisters, during a brutal raid on their family estate in Wessex. For weeks, she endured the terrifying journey across the cold, gray sea, huddled amongst other captives. The stench of fear and despair, a constant companion. Her fine wool gown, once a symbol of her status, was now torn and stained, clinging to her emaciated frame. Upon arrival in a bustling Viking port, perhaps Hedeby, she was paraded in the marketplace. Her blue eyes, once filled with aristocratic pride, now held a haunted, vacant look. Her long braided hair, once adorned with silver pins, hung lank and dirty. The jeers and shouts of potential buyers, the rough hands that inspected her, the complete lack of humanity in their gaze, these were the final nails in the coffin of her old life. She was sold, not for ransom, but as a thrall, to a wealthy merchant who needed household labor. Her new life began in a cramped, smoky longhouse. Her name, Ethelfled was too difficult for her new masters. They called her simply the Saxon, or a rougher, simpler name. She learned to grind grain, to tend fires, to clean. Her hands, once soft and white, grew rough and calloused. She bore children to her master, children who would never know the language of their mother's birth, who would speak only Norse, who would worship Odin and Thor. She would teach them the lullabies of her homeland in secret, late at night, whispering the forbidden words, desperately clinging to a fading memory. Her children would grow up, strong and Viking, knowing their mother was different, but never truly understanding the queen she once was, the life she lost. The unspoken fate of noble women. After Viking conquests was not a quick death, but a slow, complete disappearance of who they once were, a living ghost in a foreign land. History remembers the Viking Age for its battles, its exploration, and the rise of new kingdoms. But it often forgets the profound, intimate suffering of those caught in the crossfire. The unspoken fate of noble women after Viking conquests reminds us that war is not just about territory or power. It is about the systematic destruction of identity, the erasure of heritage, and the brutal redefinition of human lives. Their stories, largely unwritten, are a poignant testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when stripped of everything. It also serves as a chilling reminder that the conqueror's narrative often buries the most agonizing truths, leaving us to piece together the fragments of lives shattered by the relentless tide of history. Her whispers were her last connection to a world that no longer existed. The lullabies, sung in Old English, were a defiant act of memory in a house filled with the guttural sounds of Norse. Her children, with their fair hair and strong Nordic features, listened with wide, uncomprehending eyes, lulled by the unfamiliar melody. They were her captor's children, but they carried her blood, a tiny secret spark of her former noble lineage, hidden beneath layers of Viking upbringing. She watched them grow, strong and boisterous, learning the sagas of their father's people, wielding miniature axes, and dreaming of raids. Each time they recounted a tale of Viking glory, a pang of sorrow would pierce her heart, a fresh wound for the losses she endured. This internal battle was constant. Her hands, once delicate, learned the rough duties of the thrall. She spun wool, kneaded dough for flatbread, and mended torn tunics, her fingers aching from the unfamiliar labor. Yet within her, the mind of a noblewoman still held fragments of her education. She remembered the Latin prayers, the intricate genealogies of her royal house, the subtle politics of court. Sometimes, when her master's wife struggled with the household accounts, Ethelflad's sharp mind would quietly observe, recognizing errors, understanding patterns. She dared not speak, knowing her intelligence, once a mark of her standing, could now be seen as a threat, or worse, a reason for further exploitation. But no one could imagine the subtle rebellion brewing within her quiet acts. She taught her daughters, in hushed tones, how to weave patterns more intricate than the simple Viking designs, patterns she remembered from the tapestries of her ancestral home. These small acts of cultural preservation were her only solace, a way to keep a sliver of her heritage alive, even if unrecognized. She watched other thralls, some of her own Anglo-Saxon people, some from distant lands, all united in their shared despair. She saw how quickly their spirits broke, how their memories faded. Ethelfled held on to hers with a fierce, quiet tenacity, a silent testament to the queen she once was. The years blurred into a monotonous cycle of labor and survival. She saw the Viking settlement grow, New longhouses erected, more ships built, more thralls brought in. Each new face was a reminder of the relentless expansion, the continuous destruction of other lives, other kingdoms. She heard tales of further conquests, of new lands plundered, and she knew that somewhere, other noble women were enduring the same unspeakable fate she had. Her own story was just one thread in a vast, tragic tapestry of countless others, all unraveling under the brutal force of Viking might. Yet a flicker of hope, however small, remained. Her eldest daughter, a girl named Brynja, had inherited not only her father's strength, but her mother's quiet intelligence. Brynja often came to Ethelflad with questions about the stars, about the healing properties of herbs, about the stories her mother sometimes hummed. Ethelflad saw in Brynja a chance, a tiny possibility for her legacy to transcend the harsh reality of her capture. She began to teach Brynja. In secret, not just the lullabies, but the intricate stitches, the precise measurements, the silent wisdom of her former life. This small act of defiance would soon ignite a firestorm, or at least a quiet flame of remembrance in the next generation. Her own life, however, was drawing to a close. Her body, once vibrant and strong, was now weary from years of labor, her spirit heavy with unspoken sorrows. As she lay on her rough bed, the smoke from the central fire stinging her eyes, she looked at Brynja, now a young woman, strong and independent. Brynja spoke Norse fluently, lived as a Viking woman, but in her eyes, Ethelfled sometimes caught a glimpse of her own reflection, a hint of the ancient Anglo-Saxon blood, a spark of the nobility that had been brutally suppressed, but never entirely extinguished. This was the most profound aspect of the unspoken fate of noble women after Viking conquests. It wasn't just about what happened to them, but what was lost, and what, against all odds, might have secretly endured through their children. History, often written by the conquerors, celebrates the might of armies and the rise of empires. But the silent suffering of women like Ethelflad, stripped of their names, their status, and their very selves, reveals a deeper, more brutal truth about conquest. Their unspoken fate reminds us that the true cost of victory is not just counted in land or gold, but in the systematic destruction of individual identities, the erasure of heritage, and the profound trauma that echoes through generations. Yet even in the deepest silence, the human spirit finds a way to whisper its truth, to pass on a fragment of its lost world. These whispers, carried in lullabies and forgotten stitches, are a powerful testament to the enduring strength of memory against oblivion, urging us to listen for the voices that history tried to silence, to remember the lives that were so cruelly redefined.